Hey God family, how y'all doing? I'm God's daughter and this is God's daughter Ministries. Thank you so much for clicking on the video. If you are new here, hit the subscribe button. Come on, join the God family. We are very happy to have you. Also go check out my other videos and you can also go check out my other social media pages for daily motivation and encouragement. So I haven't been posting for the past 2 weeks and I apologize for that. You know, the first week I wasn't feeling that well, and last week I was preparing for something that I was supposed to do on the weekend. It took up my whole week and I apologize for that, but I am back and yeah, we move forward. So today's video, we'll be talking about the dangers of looking in the past and how that can stop you from reaching what God has for you in the future. So in the book of Exodus, we find the Israelites have been enslaved in Egypt. So when Joseph was there and he was in favor with the Pharaoh and he moved his entire family to Egypt to live there, and Pharaoh was cool with that. Some years went by, the Israelites grew in numbers and the Egyptians started to fear them, thinking that they would overpower them. So they decided to make them slaves, to assert power. And one day, now they could see that the Israelites, as much as they were still slaves, they still grew in numbers. So they decided to kill all the babies who were born around that time. Moses was one of them, but his mother was smart. She hid him in the river and in a little basket that she made, and the basket floated off to Pharaoh's daughter, and he was then brought up as an Egyptian in the palace as a prince. One day now, so all those years they have been enslaved, the Israelites kept praying to God and kept crying to God to set them free from the Egyptians and to set them free from the slavery that they were in, because the Egyptians were really abusing them. They were making them build these big buildings, like the pyramids, and build statues of Pharaoh, and they wouldn't give them enough material to build these things, so they had to find a way to make this happen, with little that they had. They worked 24/7. They worked in the hot sun, and the Egyptians just didn't care. They kept whipping them, kept ordering them around, and they were crying to God to set them free. Moses then grew up in the palace. He grew up as an Egyptian. He himself identified as an Egyptian because that's what he knew. And one day he found out that he was actually a Hebrew, and that he was called to set his people free from the Egyptians. And so it happens. We all know that story of Moses running away to the desert. 40 years later, God calling him to come back to Egypt and set his people free with the plagues. And then they were finally set free. But the story is not about Moses. So now they have been set free, right? The day that Pharaoh said, okay, leave, they left. And when they got to the Red Sea, then they started complaining. Moses, what now? You brought us out of Egypt, so what, we can die here? Is that what this is? You didn't think that we could die in Egypt, so you brought us out here to die instead? You could have just left us at Egypt, At least they had graves there. They complained about the Red Sea. Then God did something for them. He parted the Red Sea so that they can walk through it and be saved from the Egyptians that were chasing after them. Right? So they move forward. As they're walking now, they start to get thirsty, and they get to a place where the water was bitter. And then they start complaining, Moses, the water's bitter. We can't drink this water. We should have just stayed in Egypt, because at least we had proper drinking water there. And then Moses went to God and he talked to God. It's like, God, your people, they saying they don't have drinking water. They say the water's bitter. What must I do? God tells them what to do, and then the water is drinkable. Some days go by, and they're hungry now. They can't find food, so they're hungry. Moses, we're hungry. There's no food. Is that why you brought us out here, so we can die? We could have just stayed in Egypt, because at least they had food in Egypt. And then Moses goes to God and is like, God, your people again. They say they don't have food, they're hungry. God makes a way for them. And then again, they get to a place where there's no water and they're thirsty. Moses, we're thirsty, there's no water. You could have just left us in Egypt. At least we had water in Egypt. And then Moses goes to God, he's like, God, your people, they're at it again. God tells them what to do. And they're provided with drinking water. Have you noticed how every time something inconvenient happened to the Egyptians, they just started thinking about, to the Israelites, they just started thinking back to when they were in Egypt and they had everything that they need. Remembering what happened to you in the past won't get you where you need to go. You know, when you constantly look back on the past and you think of the things that you had, you think of, how it was better for you back then, just because now it's inconvenient for you, it doesn't help you move forward. Instead, it holds you where you are. It keeps you where you are. It keeps you stagnant. When you look at Lot's wife, it was Lot, his wife, and their 2 kids. They were running away from Sodom and Gomorrah because God was sending down fire to destroy it because it was a sinful place. And the angels came to tell Lot and his wife to get out of there. So when Lot and his wife and his kids were running from Sodom and Gomorrah, they were meant to look forward. But his wife decides to look back. And when she looked back, she turned into a pillar of salt. When you look back to the past and you're trying to reminisce on what was so nice about the past, you don't move forward. It keeps you stagnant. Lot's wife looked back and she remained where she was till I don't know however long. But every time you keep looking back, you don't move forward. It's either you stay where you are or you are moving further back. The Israelites frequent complaints and frequent looking back on the past, talking about, it was so nice in Egypt, at least we had water, at least we had food, at least we had beds, it was so good. Why are we here? It moved them further and further away from what God had promised them. You do know that the Israelites were supposed to get to Canaan in 11 days. They were supposed to have gotten into Canaan, lived their whole life with the land of milk and honey in 11 days. But it took them 40 years to get there. Why? Because they kept thinking that the past offered them way better than what God was trying to give them in that moment. They just kept looking back on the past, thinking about all the things that they had. Not remembering how they were suffering in Egypt. They just remembered the good things about Egypt. Just because their circumstances right now is inconveniencing them, or it's not where they want to be, so they start thinking back on when life was good. And I feel like a lot of us are like the Egyptians. Just because our current circumstance is inconvenient to us, just because we're not where we want to be, we start thinking back on the past about where we used to be and how we had what we wanted, not realizing that when you had that thing in the past, it wasn't helping you at all. It was oppressing you. And this looking back into your past, it's a tactic that the enemy uses as well, because he knows that if he can have you looking at your past, if he can have you keep looking back, he can keep you where you are, and he can stop you from seeing what God wants to do for you. That's what was happening with the Israelites. Every time they kept complaining about how we had better in Egypt, God's like, you know what? Add more days. Y'all are not ready to get to where I need you to be at. if you guys stay looking back and stay looking at what you're missing out on, you are never gonna see God moving in your life. You're never gonna see what God's trying to do for you. You're never gonna see your Canaan, your land of milk and honey, because you keep looking at your Egypt. You keep looking at your Egypt. You know, and you know that the people who God had promised will enter Canaan never made it into Canaan. That's how bad it was. A whole new generation is the one that entered into Canaan. The old generation, the generation that initially left Egypt, never made it into Canaan. Because they just thought Egypt was better, because they experienced Egypt. They thought Egypt was better than what they were going through, so they didn't make it. God's like, you know what, I'm going to get other people to inherit this land, because clearly here, a new generation entered Egypt. The new generation that never got to experience Egypt was the one who walked into Canaan. Quit looking back. You're not missing anything back there. Every time you keep looking back on your past, it's kind of like you're canceling out your future, because you trust the past more than you do what God has said before you. It's like you're trusting in your own experience than you are trusting in God.